So I'll jump right in, Kevin, with an introduction. So my name is Mike Wright. I'm the Vice President of Sales and Marketing here at Acumen Learning. I'm excited to have my boss of, the last 12 years on today's call. Kevin founded Acumen Learning back in 2002. And unlike a lot of training companies out there, a lot of times they'll write a book and then they'll be like, this is pretty good stuff. I think I'll create a training company. Kevin is kind of unique. He kind of created a training company and said, you know what, I think I've got something here. I think I ought to write a book. And so in 2002, he released his book, Seeing the Big Picture, which overnight just about became a #1 Wall Street Journal bestseller, a New York Times bestseller, and has really kind of launched our company and launched kind of a lot of Kevin's ideas that he's going to share today. So we're excited to have Kevin, the founder and CEO of Acumen Learning, join us. And Kevin, I will let you take it away.
Mike, thanks. I thought you'd go on a little bit longer.
There's so much I could say, Kevin, if you want me to go more and more. Kevin's the greatest boss ever, and
no, that was good, Mike. Thanks. Yeah. Hey, and welcome to the call, everybody. Excited to be with you. And as Mike mentioned, we're going to use the chat box quite a bit. Matter of fact, we're going to start right now. So in the chat box, you notice that the subtitle of this session is going to be Building Business Acumen. So let's start with this question. What is business acumen? So in the chat box, throw out some of your ideas here. And I'm going to outweight you. So I really encourage you to be a participant in this process here. Okay, Veronica, thank you. Understanding how the company makes money. I love that. Anything else people would like to add to Veronica's comment there? Finance. Yeah, Mike. Finance is certainly a big part of the business and having business acumen. Anybody want to add an additional comment there? How to prioritize our business decisions. And the norm of financial perspectives. And so I like what you're saying here. And when you really think about business acumen, I'd suggest there's two key parts to it. One is understanding a company, and then a second is the decision-making process. And boy, I see more ideas coming in here, knowing about the different departments in your company. Boy, I think that's a big part of it, Frank, and Norma enterprise-wide thinking. And so let me put forward this definition that I think encapsulates what many of you have said in the chat box. Understanding how your company makes money and acting to improve the money-making process. So as I mentioned, two parts to it. One, knowing the business, and then second, making the right decisions around the business. And so those are the two critical parts of really kind of exercising or practicing business acumen. There was a commercial I saw once because business acumen isn't about working harder. Of course, we want to work hard, and I would imagine all of us are, but it's about working smarter. And this commercial I was mentioning, it showed a man coming out of his apartment, and you see thick snow blanketing the ground in all of the cars. And well, he goes over to his car and he starts scraping it off. And they sort of fast forward, and you see that he's done an extremely thorough job of cleaning the snow off his car. And then he pulls out his key fob and he clicks the button on it. And the car next to the one he just cleaned off lights up. So in other words, he spent all that time cleaning the wrong car. Now, what's interesting is I like this guy. He does such a thorough job, and he does it very efficiently. Problem was he wasn't very effective. And so I would suggest that business acumen helps you identify the right problems in an organization to be working on. So I want you to be thinking about a business that you would start. I'm going to share mine, a hobby or a business. And then in a minute, I'm in the chat box. I'm going to ask you to kind of enter yours. But here's a picture of my family taken about 2 years ago on the beach. And the reason I wanted to show you this is to tell you about a business that really is interesting to me and that I'm tracking quite closely. Sons 2 and 3, about 5 years ago, started a photography backpack company called Wandered. And my wife and I invested in it, so we're partners with them. And not long after they started, they hired their older brother, Austin, and then their younger brother, Connor. And so my 4 sons now run this company. And it's really fun to see them wrestling with all the challenges in a business startup. Of course, now they're 5 years into it, so they survived that initial startup challenge. But you really see the principles that we talk about in our programs and in the book really apply in another business startup. And so this is a fun company for me to watch. Of course, I love what I do with Acumen Learning, but watching my boys' business and interacting with them is also quite a delight. So in the chat box, if you were to start a business, now I know you love where you are, you're happy, you're excited with what you're doing. But if you were to start a business, what would that business be? So in the chat box, send me a note. Don't have to describe the business. You can just give us a quick blurb about what kind of company that would be. Training consulting. Thanks, Veronica. Training company. Pamela, thanks. Animal rescue. Amanda, thank you. Restaurant. Joaquin. Yeah, restaurant. Joaquin, tell us what kind of restaurant, you know, the sort of the fare that you would offer there. Ira says fashion. Susan says an HCM company. Oh, Joaquin says Mexican food. Weston, dog training. I like that. Well, let's pick one of these. Joaquin, I'm going to pick on you, if that's all right. And if we see some others, antiques, coffee shop, music record. Oh, Jay, music record company. I don't see that one come up much. But let's pick on Joaquin for a minute. Joaquin said he wants to open a Mexican restaurant. And let's say that the rest of us, there's about 40 of us on the call at this point, that we're going to help Joaquin get this restaurant going. What would he need to have and do to get started in the business? So in the chat box, give me some ideas of what Joaquin needs to think about as he's going through this business startup. Tortillas. Veronica says business plan. Frank says location, 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 location. You got to get that right. And Jay indicated that as well. Mexico City is where Joaquin is thinking. Thanks, Joaquin. So you got the location. Employees, Ira says equipment, funding. Boy, Weston, you're right on that one. You certainly have to need, or you need cash, capital, funding to get the business started. Boy, Susan says a budget. Yeah, like that as well. So as you think about a business and starting a company, boy, it can be tough. Matter of fact, I'd love your thoughts and ideas on what percent of startups do you think make it 4 years? So in the chat box, give me a percentage. What percent of startups do you think make it 4 or 5 years? So I got a 5% from Susan, a 20, a 20, a 5, a 20, a 15, a 1%, a 20, a 10. Yeah, less than 10, a 15. So yeah, we're kind of hunting around. It's actually a little higher than most people think. It's about 35% that make it 4 years. Now, a lot of companies won't make it, you know, even if they make it 4 years, they might fail after that. So obviously business is tough. You've got a 1 in 3 chance of a business startup making it 4 years. And then that doesn't guarantee that your business is going to thrive. Even after that, you're still at risk. What do you think gets in the way? In the chat box, share with me your ideas on why business startups fail if they do. So let's hear your ideas on that. The business is going to fail. What's the likely reason for it failing? Market penetration, external threats, finances, egos. Boy, Tom, like that thought. Poor long-term planning. Money, vision, lack of planning, run out of cash, Sean says, grow too fast or too slow, run out of cash. So I had 2 or 3 or 4 of you talk about cash in this. Matter of fact, that's one of the big reasons a company will fail if it does, is it underestimates its cash needs. See, I think a lot of people start a business with the idea of, boy, once I get the doors open, I'll very quickly generate enough cash to cover my expenses. And what they don't realize is oftentimes a business startup takes, you know, a period of months or possibly even a year or more to get to that cash flow positive stage. So, you know, the bottom line is, oh, and several of you said the pandemic. Yeah, that certainly has thrown a whole other wrinkle into business plans, business startups, et cetera. Well, I would suggest, in addition to all these ideas that you've talked about, something else also gets in the way of a business being successful. And that is the owners or the executives lack business acumen. Remember, business acumen is understanding how a company makes money and then making good decisions around that money-making process. And so I think a lot of people are excited about a business idea. Maybe it's a hobby, maybe it's just been a long-term interest. So they start the business and quickly find out that their own business is more about having to run a business than it is about that hobby or their idea that they were excited about at the beginning. And I would suggest if you could get your arms around 5 business drivers, really understand this model well, it'll give you insight into any business, whether it's a startup, whether it's your own company, whether it's a competitor, a supplier. Maybe you're interested in investing money, buying stock in a company. And again, I'd suggest these 5 drivers will give you the essence of how companies make money, how executives are measured, what investors look for. And so let me share kind of the overview of the model, and then we'll dive into it more deeply. So the first 3 business drivers are cash, profit, and assets. Now, if you've got a notepad somewhere, you might want to write these down, these first 3. And the reason I know these 3 fit for every company, even if you're a privately held small company, you're thinking about these 3 business drivers because they simply reflect the 3 financial statements. And as you know, the 3 financial statements that public companies, they've got to submit these to the Securities and Exchange Commission every quarter and at year end. And even privately held companies are tracking their performance from these 3 financial statements. They each tell a different story. The statement of cash flows tells the story of cash. The profit and loss tells the story of profit and how it's generated. And the balance sheet lists your assets, liabilities, and your equity. So I know these 3 business drivers are on the minds of executives, on the minds of investors, and those that are making decisions in a company. The 4th business driver is growth. And I know that's critical because growth drives value in a business. It helps expand a mission for an organization, et cetera. And we'll talk more about that later. But growth is critical to organizations as well. Now, maybe if you're a small entrepreneur and you've got maybe you got a little flower shop, or maybe you're a dentist, they might not think about growth as much as most of the organizations that we're a part of. Now, in the center of these 4 business drivers is people. And people refers to both the employees as well as the customers that the organization serves. So that's our 5-driver business model. And we've had a chance to deliver this to hundreds of companies all over the world. I think, we've taught in 40, 50 countries now, worked with 35 of the Fortune 50, and then many others of the Fortune 500. So we've validated this model, hundreds of times. So with this in mind, there's 5 lessons I want to share with you today of what your CEO needs you to know. And you'll notice that there's a lesson for each one of the 5 drivers. So as we get into the lesson, you're also going to learn about the 5-driver model in the process. So let's start with cash. Now, what do they say about cash? Cash is king. I'm sure that was coming to your mind as well. Cash is a company's oxygen supply. And I sort of get a kick out of what Al Shugart said. He said, cash is more important than your mother. Now, I'm sure his mom wasn't pleased if she heard him say that, but the point he was making, in spite of the love he has for his mom, is that if you don't get cash right in a business, nothing else matters. So cash really is king. Cash really is the lifeblood of an organization. Now, in the chat box, what happens to companies that run out of cash? Let's hear your thoughts on that. What if a company's going to run out of cash? What's going to happen? They go bust, short-term loan, they close, bankrupt. Yeah, bankruptcy. They have to bring in investors. Yeah, you're basically hitting at it. There's two fundamental things a company can do. Good employees lead. Boy, Mike, thanks for sharing that. Sharon, need a loan. Yet there's 2 fundamental things a company can do if it's running out of cash. It either figures out a way to get more. That could be by borrowing or getting more shareholders, or they're going to go out of business. And so your options are quite limited. It's interesting to look at Sears. This one kind of hurts for me because I grew up, at my age, my growing up years, around Christmas time or birthday time was sitting on kind of the living room floor with a Sears catalog opened and going through the toy section. I've got really fond memories of, looking at that and, having big dreams. And it's interesting. Sears was founded in, I think it was 1893. Sears and GE were just a year apart, both 1892 and 1893. So Sears has been an iconic company for years, but they're in bankruptcy right now. And in the chat box, what is Sears doing to raise, what's it been doing in the last few years to raise cash? They're losing money in their core business. So they've had to pull, cash out of the bank, out of their savings, out of their checking, et cetera, out of their cash reserves. What else have they been doing to raise cash? Anybody want to share some of their thoughts in the chat box on that? Not making money in the business. They're running low their cash reserves. Boy, closed stores. Yep. Jay, closing some of their stores. Tammy, selling brands like Craftsman Reed, spot on. And that one sort of hurts for Sears. They've been raising cash by selling Craftsman tools and an iconic brand. Now they still have to license them back because they're selling it through the store, but they've sold Sears, Die Hard Battery, Kenmore Appliances. The good news is Sears has been able to raise money by selling assets. The bad news is they don't own those assets anymore. Some of those assets were key drivers, in their financial performance. So, it's still tough to watch Sears. They're still trying to make it go of it, but it's not looking really good at this point. Ultimately, the point I'm trying to make on this is that no matter how long you've been around, Sears 130 years, no matter how long you've been around, you can't ignore cash in a business. Now, can a company have too much cash? Chat box, yes or no? Can a company have too much cash? Yes or no? So I'm getting, I've got already about 8 or 9 yeses, no's yet, but yep. So exactly right. Now, if you have too much cash, it's a good problem to have. I'll give you that. You'd rather have too much than too little. But here's the challenge. Let me give you 3 challenges with a company sitting on too much cash. One, it generates a low return. Yeah, Chris says, unless you're Apple, I'll mention that one in a minute. Yeah, so if a company is sitting on huge amounts of cash, it generates a low return. And Chris brought up Apple. Anybody know how much cash Apple is sitting on right now? It's a lot. Did anybody have sort of a rough number they'd throw out there as to how much cash Apple is sitting on? David said 308 billion, Jay 100 billion. Yeah, you're not too far off. You're actually splitting the difference between the two of you. They're sitting on around 190 to 200 billion dollars in cash. Here's the problem with Apple sitting on all that cash. It's generating almost no return. If you've checked the interest that you're earning on your checking or savings right now, it's probably less than 0.25% on that. And Apple's not doing a whole lot better on a return. So that's a challenge with Apple sitting on so much. It's not generating a return. Matter of fact, several shareholders, this goes back about 5 years, were so frustrated with the amount of cash that Apple was sitting on, they actually sued the company they owned a share of. Well, probably many shares of. And their whole point was, management, you're misusing cash. It's not generating a return. So either invest it to grow Apple further, or why don't you give it back to us as shareholders? And you can do that through paying dividends or buying back stock. And so Apple, because of that, started paying dividends and started buying back its own stock. So that's one challenge with too much cash, is that it generates a low return. And I mentioned the second one, challenge of too much cash, is shareholders don't like it, or investors, if you're not a publicly traded company. A third challenge with too much cash is it might spend too easily. If Apple made a $500 million mistake, they probably wouldn't be too worried about it because they've got so much cash. So that can be an additional challenge. Now, I'll just throw this out. It's a good problem for Apple to have. They're a profitable company. They've been growing. And so their generation of cash is a phenomenal example of a company that's well run around that. So, kudos to Apple for having the problem of too much cash. Again, it's a good problem to have, but as I mentioned, from a shareholder's perspective, those are the wrestles they have with the company sitting on so much cash. All right. Now, here's our first lesson, and it's around cash. And I want to talk about the difference between a company's cash position, that's what we've been talking about at this point, versus a company's cash flow. So let me see. I noticed that Jay is on the line, and just using Jay, let's say we're looking at Jay's personal finances. Jay, I know nothing about your finances, but let's say that we look at Jay's bank account and we see in there $20,000. When we talk about a company's cash position, we're talking about at a point in time. And so, for example, at Apple's 190, 200 billion, that was as of, theoretically December 31st, 2020, how much cash did they have? So that's a company's cash balance. or cash position. Yeah, way to go, Jay. So that's cash on hand. Now, when we look at a company's cash flow, or Jay's cash flow in this case, let's say Jay generates $50,000 in a salary. He actually gets in cash $50,000 over a year. And in that same year's period of time, he has cash expenses of $40,000. Well, that means when you take cash coming in minus cash going out over a period of time, that represents cash flow. And so in this case, Jay's cash flow for the year would be $10,000. Now, let me pose this question to the group. What is more important to a company, cash on hand or cash flow? In the chat box, let me know either cash on hand or cash flow. So David says cash flow. Getting quite a few cash flows here. Yeah, most everybody's indicating cash flow. Flow for sure. Yeah, you're exactly right. Cash flow indicates a company's ability to generate cash, not just now, but in the future. So for example, if Sears had almost no cash, but they had good cash flow, they'd be able to keep the doors open. They'd be able to stay afloat. Their problem is they have negative cash flow, and as a result, they've had to pull all the cash out of the bank, and that's gone. And so now they've been selling assets to stay alive as an organization. So cash flow is a big idea. All right, so we've had a chance to talk about cash. Let's now move to our second business driver, which is profit. And hopefully you've kind of created this diamond shape on a note page somewhere. Cash, profit, assets, growth, and people. So as we're talking about profit, I love what Sister Irene Krauss said. She was called the CEO nun, the first woman to serve as chairman of the American Hospital Association. It's a non-profit. But Irene recognizes that even as a nonprofit, if she doesn't bring in more cash than she spends in running the operation, she won't be able to keep the doors open. And so she has this idea, coins this phrase, no margin, no mission. Another way to think about it might be to say, no profit, no purpose. And I really admire companies that do both of these well, that both have a high mission or a high elevated sense of mission, as well as they also run a good business and generate a good profit. Send me in the chat box some companies that you think have both a phenomenal mission as well as run a great business. In other words, great margin and great mission. Who comes to mind for you? Yeah, David, thank you. Lockheed Martin. Who else comes to mind as you think about Acumen Learning? Thank you. From our own Mike Wright. UPS, yeah, thank you. ExxonMobil, Veronica, thank you. Amazon, Carrie. Microsoft, David. Yeah, these are great, extremely well-run organizations. Another one I'd throw into mix is Costco. Costco has been paying full wages and full benefits for years, even before the recent trend where most big box retailers are doing that now. And they also have run a great business over time. I call Costco the $500 store because you don't go in there to buy a loaf of bread. You know, you go in there, you think, well, I need a loaf of bread, maybe something else, and you end up buying a case of batteries, and then, you know, maybe a 3-pack of, you know, something you didn't necessarily see. Maybe it's, you know, fruit juice and then a case of something else. So I always, you know, refer to it as the $500 store. Oh yeah, and Sharon, you were going to mention Costco as well. So again, I admire companies that get both of these right. For example, if you've got a company that has a great mission but no margin, well, they can't sustain the mission. And if you have a company with great margin but no mission, well, that's not very engaging for employees. It's not very motivating. So again, companies that get both of these right are really companies to emulate. Well, Albert Chu, I loved President of Freeman. I loved his idea on profit because I found in some circles, profits become kind of a dirty word. Oh, we're above profit. You know, that's not our motive. We're about other things. Well, that's okay, but if you don't generate a profit, you can't sustain a mission. And so Albert put it this way: generating a profit is the most benevolent thing we can do for our employees and customers because profit is what allows us to continuously reinvest in the business for their benefit. Loved how he put that. Here's another example of the importance of getting both right. This is Japan Airlines, a part of their mission statement. They were formed in the 1950s. And as a result of the devastation of, you know, World War, they wanted to make a difference as a company. And so in part, their mission statement reads, "We will not only transport people and goods to their respective destinations safely and on time, but will also bring peoples, their cultures, and their hearts together as our contribution to world peace and prosperity." Now, it's a bit grandiose, but I like it because they recognize that when people get face to face, they treat each other differently, with more respect, with more care. And so they're feeling like, boy, our goal, our role as a company, as an airline, is we help get people face to face. And that's their contribution to world peace and prosperity. So I really like the sentiment, really like the idea. Here's the challenge. 2010, they filed for bankruptcy protection. In the process, they lay off almost 16,000 people. And as you think about it, if a company is in bankruptcy, how focused are they going to be on their mission, on their values? Well, probably not much. If a company's in bankruptcy, if a company is struggling financially, all of the focus becomes about survival, and mission tends to take a back seat. So again, making the point that no margin, no mission. If a company doesn't run a great business, it's hard to be a great company. Let me say that again. If a company is struggling to run a great business, it's hard to be a great company. It's hard to support and fulfill the mission and values that the company would like to achieve. Well, so here's lesson 2. And again, if you're taking notes, let me suggest you write down what I'm going to put on the screen here. I want you to show you the basics of a profit and loss statement, a P&L, and I want to give you the measures and the margins as they showed in 2020. So this would be the average company in 2020. So, and I'm going to use the idea that at sales of $100, for every $100 in sales, what profit margins did companies generate in 2020? So on your note paper, if you'd write total revenues, it's also known as sales, and $100. Now, the first expense that comes out of a P&L is cost of goods sold, or cost of products sold, or cost of services. And for the average company in 2020, about 53 of every $100 went into cost of goods sold. It's the biggest expense most companies have. Well, non-service companies, I should say. And the 2 big line items in cost of goods sold is raw materials and direct labor. So anybody who's part of the manufacturing process. Well, CEOs then like to measure this number quite closely. What's left over is $47. And if we put that in a percentage term, a gross margin of 47%. Now, the next big expense that comes out is selling general administrative. Sometimes you'll hear that as SG&A or G&A for general administrative. That takes out another $32 of every $100 for the average company in 2020. So what you get left over is operating profit, which is often called EBIT, earnings before interest and tax. Well, I find that a lot of executives talk about operating profit more than they do net income, which is profit after interest and tax, or profit after all expenses are taken out. And the reason a lot of executives will focus on operating profit, or EBIT, is because the average employee can't do much about interest. The money was already borrowed, you have to pay it. So it's a decision that was made prior. And taxes is something that just is. You've got to calculate it, how to pay it accurately. And so that's why a lot of CEOs like to look at that operating profit, which is before interest and taxes. Now, and then you've got another good number of executives that then will focus on the bottom line, or net profit. Now, if you look at the net profit, the average company in 2020 generated $10 of profit on $100 of sales. In other words, they had a 10% profit margin. Excuse me. Now, that's the average for, and I'm going to use it for the S&P 500 companies that are across all industries. So it's basically the average of, all companies out there was about 10%. I hope you know what your company's net profit margin is. It's a big deal. It's a big number. It gets a lot of attention and a lot of focus. Now, if the average is 10%, who do you think has much higher, who has higher margins than that 10%? In the chat box, send me some ideas of companies that you think are highly profitable, have really high profit margins. Let's see what you come up with. All right, so I got an Apple, tech companies, Google, Amazon, MasterCard. Another Amazon on that. The Amazon's going to surprise you. Weston, Visa, Lockheed Martin, Brian Analog Devices. Yeah, let me. You've captured some of those that are on my list. although one of those is going to be on the opposite list. But Visa, 48% profit margin. Man, Visa is printing money. You've got Facebook, 37% profit margin. So again, for every $100, Facebook is generating $37 in profit versus the average of $10. So very profitable at Facebook. Microsoft, 36%. McDonald's, this is an interesting one at 32%. Google, 29%. Apple, several of you mentioned Apple. Coca-Cola, 22%. J&J, a pharmaceutical company. One of you had mentioned pharma companies at 20% as well. So here's the question for the group. Why do these companies have higher margins than the average? What is it about their business model that generates such high margins? Send me your thoughts in the chat box here. Okay, Carlos says low expenses, volume, uncompetitive market, overhead, higher liability, lower cost of goods sold. Yeah, I like these ideas. We're not quite yet hitting on the secret here. Some of these are true. For example, all of them have big volume. I've picked big companies. Some of them have low expense, but some of them have high expense. Some of them have low cost of goods, some high. The difference is this. These companies are either selling something unique or they've branded themselves as unique. And several of you talked about investments in the chat box here. And part of it is they've invested heavily in their brands. So for example, Coca-Cola. Does anybody sell something similar to what Coca-Cola offers? Absolutely, yes. But when you open Coke, you open happiness. And who doesn't want happiness? And so they have created such unique branding around Coca-Cola that there's brand insistence. People, really, oftentimes insist or prefer Coca-Cola. And so when you look at all of these companies on this list, they're either selling something unique, meaning you can't get it anywhere else. Like, for example, Facebook. It's hard to replicate Facebook anywhere else. Google, I think, has 70 or 80% of all searches are done on Google. So they're providing a unique product. And then some of the companies have just branded their companies as unique. So that's what allows them to get these higher margins. If they are seen as unique or are unique, they're able to charge more money. People are willing to pay it, and therefore they get higher margins. Yeah, David, so it is. It's unique niche, and as you said, kind of niche in their area. So now let's contrast this to the other list. Who would have lower margins? And several of you mentioned a company that's actually going to be on this list. So who would be on your list of thin margin companies or lower margin companies? Manufacturing, yes, generally or lower. Walmart, several Walmarts, 3, 4 Walmarts. Yes, Sharon, Amazon is on this list. Gas, yep, media companies, Dell. Yeah, so let's look at some that I've got here, and you've mentioned them. General Motors, 9%. Amazon, 7%. And by the way, this is up. Amazon was running at about 2, 3, and then 4%. And just in the last year or two, probably because of COVID, have been able to move that up to 7%. Tyson Foods, one of the largest chicken manufacturers in the world, at 5%. Chevron, I think somebody here had mentioned an oil company or gas. Yes, Chevron's on the list. Walmart at 2%. It's about 2.5% profit margin. And Costco at 2%. So this question, why the low margins for these companies? What is it about their model that brings about thinner or lower margins than the average of 10%? Looking for your thoughts on that. Okay, Reed, competition, exactly right. Anju, generic product offering, Lilly, commodity, you're all on the right track. High competition, and so based on volume. Yeah, you guys all have it. These companies aren't necessarily selling something unique. For example, you can find a car with a lot of different, car companies. Amazon, things that you're getting there, you can get other places. Chevron, most of us don't buy gas from a particular brand that we're loyal to. Most of us buy the cheapest gas because we assume it's all the same. So in other words, these companies are in very competitive spaces selling commodities. And since they're selling commodities, there's no uniqueness, meaning you can get it anywhere. People generally look for the best price. And so the bottom line is, if you're not unique, you better be cheap. Yeah. And so, here's a way to look at that. Here's 2 car companies, a unique brand, which is Porsche, and then one that's more on the cheap side would be Volkswagen. Matter of fact, I think Volkswagen now owns the Porsche brand. And so playing this out, Porsche is unique, but the profit generated on the sale of one Porsche is enough to buy a Volkswagen. But if you look at the very bottom on the slide here, Porsche only sold about 225,000 cars, whereas Volkswagen sold 11 million cars in the year. So which one of these models is better? They're both good models. Walmart has a great business model. Their margins are thin, but they're growing, and they generate, because of their volume and their size, they generate a lot of profit dollars, even with those thin margins. On the other side, you've got a Google, also a great business model, high margins and high volume. And so one of these models I wouldn't suggest is better than the other, but it's important to know which model your company aligns more towards. Companies that have thin margins, boy, they're always looking for ways to save money. They're looking at efficiencies. Companies that are, more of a unique offering, more of a commodity type offering, and so they're lowering prices, tend to be very efficient, whereas the high profit companies, boy, they're looking to add value. Maybe they're a little more focused on innovation at times. They're constantly trying to create the new offering or the next reiteration. And so it's important for you to know what approach your company takes and then help align your actions, your department strategies to what the company needs. All right. Bottom line, as I was mentioning, you need to know your company's financial performance. And that then, by understanding what the company's performance is, what your company's trying to achieve, what they're trying to accomplish, then align your strategy, decisions, actions, and your employees around what the company needs. Create that line of sight between what your department does, what you do, and what the company needs. By the way, that's important for engagement as well. Employees want to know how they fit in and make a difference in the business. All right. So we've covered lesson 2 and our second business driver. Now we're going to move on to assets. And an asset is anything you own or control that has value. So in the chat box, give me some idea of assets that your company has. Okay, buildings, thank you. Tooling, equipment, chillers, equipment, air compressors, computers, hardware, software, equipment. Yeah, you're getting the idea. So pipelines, real estate. Yeah, these are all assets that a company owns or controls. Intellectual property also added to the list. Yeah, and so is the goal, yes or no, in the chat box, is the goal to amass as many assets as you can get? Is that the organizational goal? To amass as many assets as you can get, yes or no? Okay, I've got, oh boy, yeah, we've got no's popping up quite a bit here. That is not the goal. The goal for an organization is to get the right assets at the right place at the right time that the company needs to run the business. So what you're actually looking at, trying to balance, and this is lesson 3, is to balance asset strength with asset utilization. And let me give you 2 or 3 examples here of what I mean. We talked about cash. The goal is to have enough cash to be financially strong. But if you have too much cash, it's not well utilized. It's not generating a return. So companies are trying to get the right balance of cash on hand. Inventory would be another example. If you've got more inventory than you need, well, the strength is you can meet a customer's needs. They place an order and you're able to fulfill that. The challenge is you might have inventory sitting there that could become obsolete. You're having to store it. It ties up cash. It's not well utilized. So companies that hold inventory are trying to get the right balance with that as well. Third example might be building space. If you've got a lot of building space, well, you've got the means and the asset strength to house everybody that needs an office. And also your manufacturing processes in big buildings. If you have too much building space, though, it's not well utilized. It's sitting there, it's empty, it's not generating a return. It's probably costing you some money to maintain it. So building space, again, you want the right amount to run the company well. And so as you think about assets, the challenge is to balance the asset strength, the availability of it, the use of it with, are we getting a return on it? Do we have the right amount in place? Not too much is a problem, and too little can be a problem as well. So that's our third lesson, is balancing asset strength and utilization. Some examples of that. Microsoft a few years ago, sitting on $100 billion in cash. They're also a cash-rich company. It's a good problem to have, but they realize they're not getting a great return on that, so they buy LinkedIn. Costs them $26.2 billion, ends up being a good use of that extra cash sitting there. It's now being much better utilized. You also have UPS that sits on hundreds of thousands of trucks around the world. And they figure out a way to make that asset more efficient, to get better utilization by avoiding left-hand turns. What's wrong with the left-hand turn? Well, you've got to wait for traffic. It's also the most dangerous maneuver in an intersection because you're crossing to turn left. So by eliminating left-hand turns, they save 20.4 million miles off of their routes. That's a big number. And so that's a way they've got better utilization from the assets they have. One more great example, Henry Ford, 1920. The Model T actually has a fair amount of wood in the manufacturing of it. And David, you're right, that was also a cost savings on that last example as we were talking about with UPS. So Ford Motor Company building the Model T, and you've got plywood in the floorboards. You also have wood in some of the beam and structure of the Model T. And so Henry Ford sees sawdust piling up in his yard, and he actually has to pay to get rid of it. And so he's got, that's not really an asset, it's now a liability, and he's trying to figure out what could I possibly do with this sawdust to turn it from a liability into an asset. In the chat box, give me some ideas on what you think he did with it, or if you know, give us the answer. What did Henry Ford create? Particle board, good guess. It's not that, not seat cushions. Boy, I like that one. It's a good guess. Any other thoughts on what Henry Ford did with all that sawdust? It's actually a very popular brand today. Okay, not seen in kitty litter. Another great idea. Here's what he came up with. The Kingsford Charcoal Company. Kingsford was a cousin of his, and taking that sawdust that was a liability that they had to pay to get rid of, they turned it into charcoal briquettes. I'm saying that wrong. Did I get that right? And now it's another thriving business. And so another great example of somebody figuring out how to get better utilization out of the resources and assets that exist in an organization. All right, let's now go to lesson 4. And so we've talked about cash, we've talked about profit, just finished assets. We're now going to talk about growth, our 4th business driver. Now, why is growth important? In the chat box, give me your ideas. Oh, David, thanks. Briquettes. Yeah, thank you. I had a brain cramp on that one. So yeah, thank you, briquettes. So back to growth. Why is growth important? Give me some of your ideas on that. So Joaquin, growth suggests success for business. Why else is growth important? I like that idea. Talent. Yeah, if a company is growing and thriving, it attracts the best people. People want to be in a place where they've got upward mobility, they've got career pathing, they've got the ability to make more money. Retention. Yeah, Sharon, exactly right. If your company is growing because of the upward mobility and career pathing we talked about, they're likely to stay. If you're not growing, Veronica says, you're stagnant, eventually you'll go backwards, especially in a very competitive business, Veronica, or a competitive industry. Thank you. Lily says you can reinvest. Yeah, if you are growing profitably growing, then yeah, you've got the ability, you're generating the cash to reinvest back in the business. And David says, you can continue to stay in business. So I like all of these ideas. So maybe to put it this way, I'd suggest growth is important for at least these 3 reasons. 1, if you're not growing, you're dying. 2, it drives innovation in a company. If you've got a mindset of growth, then it drives innovation. It drives out of the box thinking. And then also you're going to attract and retain the best people. Here's an example, and I want you to be thinking about who these 2 companies might be. I'll maybe drop a hint here or there. But in 1991, these companies had the same sales at about $32 billion in annual sales. Now, this is an interesting comment that the CEO on the company in red made, the company on the bottom in red. The CEO told a business class something to the effect of, look, we are in a mature industry. There's really no more growth to be had. So what we're going to need to do as a company is expand outside of it. We're going to need to diversify. And so in essence, this CEO did not believe that they had any growth possibility in their existing business. What's the problem if you don't think you've got growth opportunities? In the chat box, what's the problem with that mindset? If you believe you're in a mature industry, there's really no more growth to be had, what's the challenge with that mindset? If you're going to be stagnant, David, yeah. Because if you don't believe there's opportunity, you're not going to look for it. You're not going to invest in it. You stop investing in growth initiatives. Thanks, Reed. And that's obviously what happened with this company in red. And you can see today in the year 2020, they actually had a fraction of the revenue they had in 1991. Others have said investors leave, your people also stop believing. Thank you, Frank, for that. So any guess on our two companies? One hint is that, yeah, Jay says, if you don't believe there's opportunity, you're not going to invest in R&D, so you'll stop doing that. And as all of you said, if you stop investing, stop in R&D, stop innovating, you're going to get exactly what's happened to this company on the bottom. It's a company I've mentioned before. And a hint, the company in blue is over 500 billion in revenue. So that narrows it down a bit. Any guess on our two companies? Oh, I got no takers yet. Apple versus BlackBerry. Good guess, Frank. I'll give you another hint. It's retail. I can feel the chat box heat. Yep, there you go. Sears, yeah, Sears is the company in red, and Walmart is the company in blue. And so it's amazing how the mindset of no growth opportunities exist will actually give you no growth in a business. Of course, Walmart's had a different mindset. They've grown the business and really, because of their growth and size, have phenomenal scale, brand recognition all over our good part of the world. All right, so there you go, Sears and Walmart. Yeah, David was going to say Blockbuster and Netflix. Boy, that's a good guess. I like that comparison as well between those two companies. All right, so growth on lesson 4. Bottom line is know how to impact your top and bottom line. When you think about it, what would a mature company want growing faster? Top or bottom line? In the chat box, say top or bottom to kind of express your vote on this. What does a mature company want growing faster? And okay, I got the bottoms coming in on that. Yeah, about 6, 7, 8. Yeah, it's exactly right. At the end of the day, you take profit to the bank, not revenue or sales. And so that's what most mature companies are really focused on, is growing your bottom line. Now, you might be willing to sacrifice profit. And companies do this all the time. They sacrifice profits in the short term to get growth and then eventually more profits. For example, buying a company, acquiring another company in the short term hurts profits, but in the long term grows sales and more profits. Launching a new product line, in the short term, it costs, you're expending energy, it lowers profits, but you're doing that for the idea in the long term, you're going to gain more sales and profits. So ultimately, you need to have a good sense of how to impact your company's P&L. And fundamentally, if you want to grow profit, it's increasing or lowering expenses. And be really clear on how your decisions will impact that bottom line. For example, if you bring in negotiation training, you could see how that could help drive the top line. If your salespeople are better negotiators, getting better deals, it could also help your costs. If you've got procurement negotiating, more vigorously. What about onboarding faster? Well, if you're onboarding faster and you're onboarding salespeople, that's going to drive sales. If you're onboarding faster, it's also going to save you money in many positions that might be really holding the company back. Maybe you're low on IT folks or people in finance. Well, that may, if you can onboard them faster, that may help you save money over the long term. What about business acumen training? In the chat box, how would business acumen training improve your P&L? Shameless plug. Yep, Mike. All of the above. Yeah, Marilla, exactly right. Hopefully I'm saying your name right. David, awareness, better decisions, make better decisions. And so you're exactly right. It's going to drive the whole P&L. If people have better business acumen, they're generating better deals. They're also saving money in the business. All right. Well, so that's lesson 4. Let's move on to our last, which is people. And remember, I mentioned early on that we're talking about people. It's in the center because the relationship of employees driving the needs of customers generates cash, profit, assets, and growth. So people is at the center of this model by design. Now, number 1 reason an employee will leave their job in the chat box. Their manager, thanks, David. And many of you are saying the same thing. It's a bad boss. So this is something we all know well. In the book, First Break All the Rules, they said people don't leave companies, they leave managers. So getting really good leadership is key to company success. 71% of companies with above average employee commitment had greater year-over-year revenue growth relative to their industry. And another idea that the top levers of employee discretionary effort is helping employees make the connection between work and organizational strategy and importance of job to organizational success. In other words, creating that line of sight between what the company is trying to accomplish and what your employees are doing. That connection is key. It's key to engagement. It's key to company success. It's key to keeping employees in their job longer. So as we talk about these ideas of what drives a company's success, this idea of business acumen, this idea of what financial metrics executives are focused on, boy, help your employees create the line of sight between their actions and how it drives company success. That's critical to engagement and critical to longevity of employees staying with organizations. And again, when you think of this model, it starts by investing and engaging in your people. That drives, as I mentioned, cash, profit, assets, and growth. Ginny Rometty said you define yourself by either what your customers want or what you believe they'll need for the future. And so, as you think of companies that invested well, I'm going to skip a couple of slides here. I went a little long-winded, but all the companies that were part of, the phone, the iPad, of connecting people more visually than just audibly. It's amazing in this picture. You see the difference in 8 years. It's the same place in St. Peter's Square, 8-year difference in time. And it's amazing how people now capture moments so much differently than they did in 2005. So again, an 8-year span, amazing how that innovation really took over. If you think of companies that failed, you may want to throw some in the chat box. I'll start the list here. Somebody, Blockbuster, thank you. That was my first one, David. Nice call. Kodak, Jay and Maria will come up in a minute. Yeah. Blockbuster taken out by Netflix, and now streaming stuff. Boy, remember the Walkman and the Discman? How cool those were, and how quickly that the iPod and now streaming music took that over. And then finally, Kodak. Boy, Kodak actually invented digital photography. They knew it was coming. They knew it was going to take out their film business. They still didn't act on it. And of course, digital photography, took over, and that, really dominated that space. And so it's interesting how we constantly need to innovate. As we think about customers, we constantly need to anticipate their needs. Now, as we wrap up here, let me give you a way to remember these 5 business drivers. Now, I don't know where you're sitting. You could be by yourself. Possibly you could have others around you, but don't worry about it. Do this with me. It's a kinesthetic activity to help you remember these 5 drivers. So, universal sign is cash. Do that with me. Profit. We talked about 2 levers, raising sales or lowering costs. So that's profit. Assets. We talked about strength and utilization. So give me a fist pump. I mean, like you mean it. Growth. You want it going up. And then people close to the heart. So do it with me again. Cash, profit, assets, growth, and people. And one more time, a little faster. Cash, profit, assets, growth, and people. All right. Well, we've covered these 5 lessons, and I want to leave you with kind of a final thought before I turn it back over to Mike. People work hard for a paycheck, harder for a person, and hardest for a purpose. Again, help your people understand the big picture of what your company needs and how they fit in, how they matter, how they make a difference to your business. All right. Hey, thanks, everybody. And Mike, I'm going to turn it back over to you.
Kevin, I want to say thank you. You got to pull up that slide, though, real quick. Make sure that people get that information. And then, Brooklyn, if you can put in the chat, we'd love to learn how we did, how we can improve, and maybe what a future topic would be. So Brooklyn, if you'll put the link in the chat there. Love to have you connect. Kevin, that's awfully generous to connect on LinkedIn. Get out your cameras. And also, we have a special offer of $100 off our online learning solution, which would be awesome to take advantage of. And we'll put a link in the chat box. There it is, acumenlearning.com/webinar. That'll get you to that offer. Now you can go full screen, Kevin.
All right, sorry about that.
Questions, no worries. So, Kevin, first, great job. Really appreciate it. I've sat through this presentation a lot of times, but I always learn something new.
Mike, you're a little biased in saying that.
Well, yeah, I am. But seriously, excellent job, as always. The question I think probably a lot of people have is, if we look at this, we kind of went through a generic set of, the 5 business drivers. If we were to bring this into our organization, what does that actually look like?
Yeah.
There's a real uniqueness to how we approach this topic.
Yeah, Mike, thanks for that question. So our approach is really a customized approach. So as we come in and we present this model, and then we go over a company's financials, it really is about your organization, your strategy, your financials, your objectives, your competitors. And so it really is a customized approach. You can think of getting an MBA in your own company. We really feel like if you're going to understand and gain business acumen, it has to be real time, in a real life, real company situation, not theoretical. So you'll come out really clear on how your company makes money and the decisions you can make to improve your company's results. I'd say the second part, so it's very customized that way. It's always also very customized on how you need it presented to you. Of course, in this last year and a half with COVID, the majority of what we're doing is virtual. Unfortunately, we've been doing that for 10 years. Prior to COVID, probably 25% of our business was virtual. And so our transition to virtual is quite easy. But we're still back doing now in-person sessions. We also have a blended learning approach where you can do in-person plus some virtual plus some self-paced digital content. So our delivery is customized for the content as well as the way we deliver it.
Yeah, so to follow up with that, talk to us, because I love the way that you speak to this. You kind of say sometimes nobody wants to go to a business acumen class. There's lots of, the training catalog at the corporate company, lots of different offerings, and they kind of skip over business acumen. But speak to that, because I love the way that you kind of describe kind of our approach to making it, a good experience for folks.
Yeah, thanks, Mike. This topic is not everybody's favorite. There are some folks that realize they're not good at it, so they try and fly under the radar, or they realize that they've never expended the time and energy, and so they sort of sit in the background, hoping nobody will notice that they lack business acumen. Well, as you grow in your career, that's going to become more and more evident. And I would suggest that business acumen won't automatically make you a great business person or a business leader, but it's hard to become one without it. And so what we've found is we need to make this content very accessible, because we know people, sometimes some people, love the topic, but most people are a little bit timid about it. And so our approach is one that really is engaging. We love the Socratic method. So as we teach, it's not a lecture. It's actually it's an engaged conversation around it. We use case studies, we use voting technologies, we show funny video clips. And so we're really proud of the fact that in many of our clients, we are the top rated delivery, offering that they have in an organization. You'd expect that for something about mission statements or communications or relationships, but on business acumen, we really see that as high praise and an accolade when that topic becomes one of the highest rated programs our clients offer.
Awesome. One of the other things that we've done here at Acumen Learning is invest in kind of the resources and the learning after the class. So one thing that Kevin has taught me, since I first started, is we cannot sell a training event. We have to sell a training experience. And so we've made some pretty heavy investments in activities and learning tools and resources and an online portal where you continue that learning. In fact, we have 12 different lessons that people actually can do with their teams after they've actually taken the course. So we're really extending the learning beyond that. One of our best resources, Kevin, is your book as a resource. And I know when we go to ATD or SHRM or other keynotes, you're pretty free with the books. So could we be free with the books for our audience here, for those who have stuck it out with us?
Yeah, I'm game. You put me on. What can I say, Mike?
Kevin Cope.
No, actually, that's great.
Awesome. So if you would like a book, please go fill out the form, request more information. So it's acumenlearning.com/webinar, and just put in there, hey, I'd like a book, or get a hold of us, info@acumenlearning.com. If you'd like a copy of Kevin's book, we'll get you one sent out. I think that'd be awesome. With that, if there are any other questions, we want to thank everybody for coming out. If there are any questions, you can put them in the chat box. Kevin, if you can stick around for just a few minutes to see if there are any questions that the audience has. But once again, thank you, Kevin. That was great. We really appreciate your time and spending some time with us and teaching us.
Yeah. Hey, thanks everybody. And again, if you're leaving right now, thanks for participating. Would love to get you that book in spite of my teasing a minute ago. So yeah, fill that out. We'll get one out to you. And thanks for joining. And then I will stay on with Mike here if anybody has some follow-up questions. We'll look for those questions in the chat box.
Actually, while you're typing those questions in, I almost forgot. So this was a great introduction, but we kind of have on September, correct me in the chat if I'm wrong, but I think September 29th. And Brooklyn, if you can put in the URL for that where they can sign up for the next webinar. So on the September 29th, I believe it is. Am I right? Somebody want to confirm that in the chat box? It'll come
shortly here.
It's coming shortly. Yes, I got a yes from Amanda. Excellent.
Okay.
And then acumenlearning.com/webinar schedule. We actually have a course. This is a free course that's available to folks to learn how to listen to an earnings call. So when we teach our course, one of those follow-up resources that we have is a tool that allows you to listen to an earnings call effectively, analyze what's being said, analyze those numbers so that you can really align to what the CEO is talking about. Listening to earnings calls is one of the best things you can do to build your business acumen throughout your career. And every month we have a free course that teaches you how to do this. And kind of like the book, we throw out a free tool. We're very giving over here at Acumen Learning. But it's a great opportunity to kind of get an introduction from Kevin today and then join kind of that master class, if you will, on the 29th, where we'll be analyzing a real earnings call, United Healthcare, it looks like, and then diving into that. And it doesn't matter what company we're looking at. You can look at any earnings call and learn how to analyze your own or a customer's or a competitor's or whoever it is. So September 29th, 11 a.m. Eastern, we'd like to invite you out to that as well. So lots of links over there in the chat box to click on. And it doesn't look like we have any questions coming in, but want to thank everybody for coming out. And if there are any questions, we're happy to stick around and answer any questions that we have. But again, want to thank everybody for their participation. We had a great group today. Thank you, Sean. Liz says, will we share the presentation, Kevin?
I'm on the spot again. Yeah, Liz, reach out to us. We'll figure out a way to help share some of the real relevant stuff there.
Oh. And I believe there was a recording made. So to answer that, there was a recording. Also, Kevin's going to be doing these on a monthly basis. So if you have some colleagues or some friends that you'd like to, hey, we'd love to have some of my colleagues see this presentation. He'll be doing this again in October. So for sure, check out the webinar schedule on our website.
Thanks, David.
Where was your family photo taken?
Yeah, Liz was on the beach in Cabo San Lucas. Great spot if you haven't been there, by the way. Yeah, it was Liz, it was my sons are photographers, so they set up the picture and did it for us. Thank you. That compliment.
Wait, so did you have a, now I'm interested, did you have a photographer or did they just set it up?
We set it up on a tripod. So they did it that way, and then
amazing.
they had a remote clicker on it. But you know, it's a nice camera and they set us up, and anyway, yeah, they did a good job. Thanks, Liz. In Avalon, is that Catalina Island, Liz? I've been there once, years ago. Oh, South New Jersey. Okay. Yeah. Haven't been there, but sounds nice. Yeah, thank you, Liz.
We got a few people staying online. If you didn't pay attention, the webinar is over. But we're around for questions. If we have any questions, want to be aware of folks that are still sitting online with us. But thank you for your participation, and certainly if you have any questions, let us know. Now, after that line, Kevin, now they're dropping off left.
All right, Maria, thank you.
After that one.
See you next time.
So thanks, everybody. All right, Mr. Cope, we will we'll shut it down. Thank you so much.
And thank you. And thanks for joining from India.
Yeah, awesome. If you thought you learned a lot, and you should take a customized version where we actually look at, a real company. Is that for a plug? Thanks, everybody. Have a great day and a great weekend coming up. We'll see you next time.